Nurses of Reddit, what's your worst work-related story? Had a nice older gentleman patient who was tachycardic, but all his labs were normal. He seemed like he took fairly good care of himself, was a little disheveled, but he dressed nice, and had nice shoes. We initially couldn't find anything wrong with him, but he had a peculiar odor to him that seasoned nurses would get suspicious of. I asked him if he had any infections on his body that he knew of, and he said no, but I wanted to do a thorough check, so we took off all his clothes, and he was fine, until I got down to his feet. He was wearing an old pair of socks, and as I peeled them down, literally the skin around his foot came off with the sock. I was essentially degloving his foot. It was so vile, I couldn't even get down more than a couple inches. It was raw flesh under those socks. The wound odor was so strong, I knew then that his feet were the source. He probably hadn't changed his socks in several months. He ended up being admitted and given lots of antibiotics and wound care. The memory of pulling down his socks will haunt me forever. How does that not hurt like a MF? Would he just wear the same socks the entire time and not shower/take them off to shower, or? I have such issues understanding this. 35-weeker delivered addicted to heroin and Xanax. Mom also stated she drank a fifth of tequila a day nearly every day of the pregnancy. Third baby delivered in 2 years like this. Trauma so bad from withdrawal she looked like she was having seizures. Their poop in the first few days of life is so acidic from everything in their system that it eats their bottoms. Terrible skin breakdown. Projectile vomiting. Inconsolable high-pitched neuro cry. Ugh. She's my sweet little honey, and I'm gonna take her home to foster if I can. Not a nurse, but a nursing assistant. I was pulled to the ER one night to help with a patient being brought in by ambulance. We're a small hospital with only one nurse. Anyway, we knew this patient was going to be a mess after hearing from the medics that she had been on her floor for weeks. Her husband, who didn't live with her, had been bringing her food, but otherwise left her laying there. The medics had to literally scrape her off the floor with the help of a shovel. She was a rather large lady, and you can't imagine the sores on her backside from laying there in her own filth for a month. We of course started cleaning her up right away, and it shocked me all the trash I pulled out of her folds. She even had a pop bottle lid in one fold that had carved a wound in her skin. Jeez. What were the husband and wife's relationship like for her to just be left there? They were separated. I'm sure she refused to go to the hospital for a while, and I doubt he was intelligent enough to realize how dangerous the situation was. Lady with sores and foul-smelling discharge coming from her vagina. We spent days trying to figure out what had happened. Labs sent, no infections, swabs clear. It was an enigma, until I caught her douching her vagina with bleach. She thought that's how you kept it clean. Sex education is important, guys. As the owner of a vagina. Fucking ouch. I have a few that aren't the worst out there, but they are still good times. A schizophrenic homeless man told me how he had to smoke all of the crack before the crack mamas could, so that he can save the crack mamas' babies. Then there was the old man that would poop himself, dig his fingers in his ass, then proceed to put his poopy fingers in his mouth and up his nose. Lastly was the obese woman that had horrible lymphedema, which made it hard for her to walk, so instead of getting up to the bathroom or commode she would ask for a towel to stuff between her legs and piss all over herself. The smell of that woman's inner legs cannot be described with words. Tough to choose, honestly. A couple years ago I took care of a long haul trucker who developed a wound on the underside of his ballsack. The vibration of the truck seat wore away at his scrotum, and he developed an infected ulcer. As you can imagine, this makes for a very fragile situation. One day we were helping him out of bed when his scrotum ruptured wide open, pus splattered everywhere, and his testicles flopped out. A bad day for all involved. Also worth a mention, I've seen multiple patients come in with maggots in their festering wounds. How does a maggot infestation in your body go unnoticed? And for fun, the one time I had a patient fresh out of open heart surgery try to escape through the toilet. He was having DTs and withdrawals from a variety of street drugs. Found him knee deep in the toilet trying to swim out because he loves the smack. 4 security guards couldn't hold him, even with chest tubes, mid-sternal incision. folly, the whole works. Don't do drugs, kids, but if you do, please tell us which ones. Also, please be straight with us when we ask you how much you drink. Early front loading with benzos makes your time easier, which makes our time easier. My best friend is an RN and her favorite story is about a super nice lady in her late 30s who came in because of a labial abscess. Basically she got an ingrown hair from shaving, which got infected and resulted in most if not all. I can't remember of her labia needing to be removed. But why stop there, right? Turns out, the tissue just did not want to heal. She was in the hospital for nearly a month, while they continued to IND farther and farther up this poor woman's abdomen, until she basically had no flesh from the belly button down to her lady bits. It did finally start to heal, but holy duck, man. Edit, she reminded me that the woman's hip bones were visible at its worst. So, yeah. I had a patient just like that. She was diabetic, and she got an ingrown hair from shaving. She picked it and got an infection. She kept picking it. She lost an entire half of her vulva to surgery and had to have a wound vac for weeks. Elderly meth addicted prostitute admitted for sepsis yet again. Cultures are all negative until someone sees that her colostomy is a bit too red and puffy to be considered normal. We cultured it, and she had syphilis as well as a bunch of MRSA. Turns out she was letting some of her johns duck her stoma. When we told her what we had figured out, she just shrugged and said that a hole is a hole. I work as a nurse in a cath lab. Once was on call when we got a patient with a massive heart attack, no chance of a sinus rhythm so far, and he was incredibly hard to resuscitate because he had had a coronary bypass and the bones in his chest were fused together like a knight's armor. This was a comparatively young man in my line of work, mid-50s I guess. He died in our cath lab. Anyways, turns out he had a very heated argument with his grown-up son that night when he collapsed and had his heart attack. Apparently, a couple of days later his son hung himself in the woods near where they lived. IDK about worst, but I'm at work right now, and a few hours ago I asked a patient for a urine sample and was punched in the throat. Thankfully it's gotten better since TH. Hopefully you're a nurse, or else that's an extremely awkward thing to ask for as a bartender. Hold on there pally, I'm gonna need to see some ID and PP. There are so many to choose from, but here are a couple, which are actually quite sad as well. 1. A lady who lived by herself had fainted on her patio and no one found her until 3 days later. She had been lying in her own feces, and when she came into hospital we found live maggots crawling inside her vagina, and she was septic. 2. We had a very obese and diabetic lady 250 kilograms who was only in her 50s admitted with infected/necrotic wounds on her apron. Unfortunately she had left it for so long that the only option left for her was surgery. However, surgeons deemed her unsuitable for surgery. She eventually passed away, but what was so eye-opening to me was that we had to order a specific body bag for her because she couldn't fit into a normal one. It took 2 woodsmen and 5 nurses to get her into a body bag. That first one reminds me of something that happened to my uncle's neighbor. He didn't know her or never interacted with her, and their properties were separated by a tall privacy fence. One day a couple cops knock on his door and ask if he's seen his neighbor lately. He says no, they never really see her anyways. Cops tell him she died in her backyard in the middle of August in Texas and had been there for a few days. My uncle started to put some things together in retrospect, like the fact that he kept smelling something weird when he went outside, and that when he let his dogs out, they'd run straight to the fence and go crazy trying to get over there. He felt terrible that he didn't figure it out sooner, but you just don't expect your neighbor to die in their backyard. Did a short stint in mental health. Had an 89-year-old come in. Had been found in the fetal position covered in shit and naked in her bedroom by police. She'd basically been locked in there by her parents for years, most of her life. She kept asking for her mum cause she didn't know how to do anything. Her mother was still trying to control her from prison. Posting one more that I just remembered. 20-year-old patient in for a motorcycle accident, son's helmet. Kid survived but was never going to be not a vegetable living off of 15 different tubes ever again. He literally lost too much brain tissue. That kinda stuff is par for the course in a level 1 trauma center. What was hard was watching his parents stay in his room in shifts, documenting every little twitch and spasm, and reporting it to us as a sign that he was waking up, only to have to be gently told after assessing, of course, that it's just spasms with no conscious thought. They would also happily keep telling us about the welcome home party they had planned for him and making jokes that they are never letting him buy a bike again. One day they started visiting less and less and eventually stopped coming at all. Finally, they made him a DNR. He was their only child,